So I wanted to begin this morning by telling you a little bit about James Smith. James grew up in San Diego, California. His friends call him Smitty. He graduated from Mar Vista High School in 1994. Their mascot is the Mariners. Go Mariners. After he graduated from high school, he joined the Army, and while he was in the military, he was stationed in different places all over the world, as is usually the case, but he was in Europe quite a bit and ultimately ended up in the Middle East. Eventually, he was sent to Iraq for the Iraq War in the early 2000s. When he got out of the military, he went back to San Diego, went back to school at the University of Phoenix to get his degree. He fell in love. He got married. Unfortunately for James and his wife, they had problems and it didn't last, and he and his wife got divorced a few years later. And to this day, James has never remarried. He's a huge Raiders fan. He loves going to Padre games. He's been attending Harvest Church for years. He's been super involved in serving at his church for quite a while with the ushers. He tries to stay out of politics, especially online, but if you had to pin him down, he would swing a little bit to the conservative side. He loves working on cars and golf and playing golf. He has a great sense of humor. Everybody that knows James loves him. But the real joy in James's life is that he's a dad. He has two kids, both Michael and Mia. Even as a single dad, anytime that they had a game or a performance growing up, he was always there, just super present. They are the crown jewel of his life, and he would do anything for them. In fact, Michael and Mia are both adults now, and James just picked up and relocated from San Diego to Texas last month so that he could live near his kids. He bought a house in San Antonio where he lives with his dog Brutus, who is a playful Rottweiler mix, who he's always having to try to rein in. And James, by all accounts, is just an incredible man. Now, here's a quick confession. I have no idea who James Smith is. Last week I was driving in my car and I started wondering, what's the most common name for a man in the U.S.? And so naturally I picked up my phone and I said, "Hey Siri, what's the most common name for a man in the U.S.?" And she came back with, some places say Michael, but it's really James. I was like, cool, I'll settle on James Smith. And she told me that, and the next day I got on Facebook and I searched James Smith, and there was a huge list of people named James Smith, and I scrolled down that list of people until I found somebody that I had no mutual friends with, and who didn't live in the Treasure Valley, because, newsflash, there's a lot of James Smiths that live in the Treasure Valley. And for about 10 minutes, I looked through James's Facebook profile, and that's who I just introduced you to. And when I was planning this out, I thought it's going to be pretty weird if James somehow listens to our podcast. And so, Smitty, if you're listening, you're awesome. We love you. Now, social psychologists would say that I don't know James, I just know about James. Because those are separate ideas, right? Like there's a difference between knowing someone and just knowing about them. And this is not a Bible thing or a God thing. It's just like a psychology thing. It's just a reality, right? Like I know about James, but I don't know him. And so social psychology actually tells us that to know someone is not to just know things about them that are seen, that are common knowledge, that you could find, let's say, in 10 minutes on Facebook. To know them is to actually have conversations with them where they open up and begin to share things that are unseen. Right? That all of the public information, all the stuff that I just shared, that's actually what's classified as impersonal information. That it's because it's just seen. You can actually know a little bit, and I could walk up and be like, "Hey James, how's it going, man? How's Brutus? How your kids doing?" And he would look at me pretty weird, like, "How do you know me?" But the personal stuff is the stuff that's unseen. See, there's a private, personal, intimate reality involved in knowing somebody versus just knowing about them. Like, and if I had the opportunity to sit down across from James and with tears in his eyes, he began to tell me that his hopes for his kids and maybe even regrets he has as a dad, or the fears that he has for their future, the struggles that he's had in his faith, and just sort of figuring out whether or not the move from San Diego to San Antonio was the right move, or the joys that he's experienced in this new adventure that he's on, or the ways that God has shown up for him in his life over the years. Now that's the kind of info that has to be earned, right? It only comes from being in somebody's life for a while. But if he shared some of that stuff with me, then then I could maybe begin to say, yeah, I actually know James a little bit. And it's not because I know his dog's name or how he likes his steak, but it's because I've seen aspects of his heart and life that are hidden from view for most people, even the people that are right around him. Now, I started here today because we live in a culture where people tend to know about Jesus, but they don't really know him. Only it's actually worse than that, because as hard as it is for a lot of us who have been in church for a long time or are Christians, for us to admit, like as hard as it is for us to admit, strangely, it's not just the people that are out there that are like that. It's also a lot of us who are in here. It's people who would self-identify and actually say, I know Jesus. And if we pulled back the curtain a little bit on your life, it would reveal somebody who maybe checks all the boxes when it comes to belief and faith. We know some verses and stories. We have some really big ideas about God and who Jesus is. We go to church and we take notes and we write things down and we write Bible verses and we hang them on our fridge. But we don't ever really let those things become personal for us. Very little of it makes its way into the private and intimate and vulnerable places in our lives. And on top of that, we haven't really spent hardly any time trying to get to know his heart, God's dreams and desires and intentions for our lives and for the world around us. See, it's possible for you to actually have a relationship with God through faith, for you to step into a relationship with Jesus by faith, but you not actually really know him. For you to live in that faith, but not spend any time to actually allow who he is and what he's about and his heart and his intentions and the stuff that's not seen to get into your soul. And so that's honestly what the next 8 weeks were about. Not that we would just learn some things about Jesus from the book of John, but we'd actually sit with Jesus and we'd listen to him share with us who he is in his own words. And that we would wrestle deeply with what he says and what they mean for us. Like what he's talking about and the pictures he's painting and the things he says about himself and what they actually mean for us in our lives. Now today, before we get to any of that though, I think we have to actually go backwards a little bit. So there's a place in the Old Testament where this guy Moses is running from God and he's running for his life and he's hiding out in the desert. And you can find the story in Exodus chapters 1, 2, and 3. And particularly the parts I'm going to share with you today are from Exodus 3. And absolutely, when you get home, you should sit down. It's an incredible story. And one day, Moses is wandering through the desert in the area where he lives, now herding sheep. And he stumbles across something he'd never seen before, something that is supernatural. He stumbles across a burning bush. Maybe you know this story. And as he moves in to check it out, he discovers that it's more than just a shrub that's on fire. It's actually this physical representation, this demonstration of God. And so God begins to speak to him from within the fire that's burning in this bush, but not consuming it. And God begins to tell him that he's heard the cries of his people as they've been in slavery in Egypt, and that he is planning to come down and deliver his people from slavery in Egypt. And then there's a little twist though, because then he tells Moses, surprise, you're going to help me because I'm going to actually send you to set my people free. And Moses is more than a little bit nervous and skeptical because he knows that he has a reputation back in Egypt, both among the Egyptians and with his own people, the Israelites, that he's a killer and he's a coward because he ran away. And so, of course, he's terrified of the idea of having to go back. And so he asks God a really interesting question. He says, God, if I go back, if I do this, when they ask me, when my people ask me, when your people say, why are you here? Who sent you? When they ask me who it is that sent me, what should I tell them? And as interesting of a question as that is, God actually gives him a more interesting answer. And this is what God says in Exodus chapter 3, verse 14. God replies to Moses, I am who I am. So say this to the people of Israel, I am has sent me to you. So I love sports and competition, and whether it's basketball or foosball with friends or kickball at the Memorial Day picnic. That gets a little too competitive. But there's a phrase that athletes use, and really only those who are the best of the best, those that have the highest talent level, the highest skill level, the highest awesome level, and achieve the highest, reach the highest level of achievement. They say this phrase, they say, I'm him, or I'm her. And it's a shorthand way, in other words, of saying, like, I don't have any rivals. I don't have an equal on the court, on the field. I'm him. And when you think about it, that's a pretty, sort of borderline arrogant thing to say, but that's a pretty incredible thing to even feel like you could say that with any credibility, right? Not that I would ever know. I can't think of a single arena in life that I could be like, I'm him, except for if somebody says, who's Randy Sherwood? Then I could say, I'm him. I'm the best one. I don't even know if I'm the best one. There might be other, I need to Google search. I need to Facebook search myself. Find some Randy Sherwoods. But this phrase of I'm him, it isn't really new. In fact, God was really the first person to ever really say something that kind of sounded like that. See, that weird little phrase that he says to Moses, I am who I am. It's not God trying to be cute. It's not God trying to come up with a clever way of how to answer that question. It's really the only way that God can describe himself. He's going, who should I tell him sent you? Tell him I'm him. Tell him I sent you. Because there's no one to compare him with. He's one of one. There's no backdrop that God could use or reference point that he can point to explain or describe himself in a way that we would get or a way that would make sense to us and help us truly understand who he is. He's going, there's no language, there's no words that can describe who I am. So just say, I am who I am. Tell him the I am sent you. See, God didn't just create everything. He sustains everything. Part of what he's saying is, without me, none of it exists. Everything else and everyone else has a start date and an expiration date and exists because it depends on something else and because of something else, except for me. I am existence. I am reality. He, the one who was never made and never changes and is always enough, that's who's sending you, Moses. That's who's on your side. And I don't know if any of that made a lot of sense to Moses in the moment or not, but I do know that he ended up going. So thousands of years later, now we fast forward to the person of Jesus. And through the entire book of John, Jesus does something that I think only the people in his world could fully understand the implications of what he was saying when he did it. Because over and over and over again, Jesus used this phrase. He gave himself this same name, I am. And when we read that, because of the way it sort of gets translated and the way that we sort of imagine it or read it or hear it in English, we go, oh, okay, big deal. I am too. But Jesus referring to himself in that context, in that culture, and this is what it would have meant to them, and this is what it means to us. Him referring to himself in that way was more shocking to people than almost all of his miracles that he would ever perform. Than the moment when he touched a blind guy and made him see, or the moment where he took a guy that had been disabled from birth and made him walk. It was more startling than taking a few fish and loaves of bread and feeding thousands and tens of thousands of people. It was more startling and shocking than him walking on water, because people had the ability to take those things and explain them away or sort of recontextualize them. See, if you really want to understand who Jesus is, if you really want to begin to truly know him, you have to understand that Jesus is him. He's him. He is the I am. He is one of one. He has no rivals. He has no equals. The truth is, when Jesus claimed to be God, because make no mistake about it, when he said, I am, that's what he was claiming. He was setting the agenda for the whole conversation with humanity. for how we would relate to him. And not just in the general, but very specific in the way that he interacted with us as individuals. So look, I want to take you to a story in John chapter 4 that kind of illustrates what I'm talking about. It says this in verse 3. It says, he, speaking of Jesus, left Judea and went back once more to Galilee. Now he had to go through Samaria, so he came to a town in Samaria called Sychar, near the plot of ground Jacob had given to his son Joseph. Jacob's well was there, and Jesus, tired as he was from the journey, sat down by the well. Think about that for just a second. That God in all of his expanse, God who is I am, God who is, it's him, allowed himself, he set aside the expression of his divinity and he took on our humanity. The God who existed, who is inexhaustible, is now walking the earth and is tired and weary and hot. And so he sits down by the well, and it was about noon. When a Samaritan woman came to draw water, Jesus said to her, will you give me a drink? His disciples had gone into town to buy food, and the Samaritan woman said to him, you're a Jew and I'm a Samaritan woman. How can you ask me for a drink? In other words, you're not even supposed to be talking to me. For Jews do not associate with Samaritans. Verse 10, Jesus answered her, if you knew the gift of God and who it is that asks you for a drink, you would have asked him, and he would have given you living water. Sir, the woman said, you have nothing to draw with, and the well is deep. Where can you get this living water? Are you greater than our father Jacob, who gave us the well and drank from it himself, and as did all of his sons and his livestock? And Jesus answered, everyone who drinks this water will be thirsty again, but whoever drinks the water I give them will never thirst. Indeed, the water I give them will become in them a spring of water welling up to eternal life. The woman said to him, sir, give me this water so that I won't get thirsty and have to keep coming here to draw water. And he told her, go call your husband and come back. I have no husband, she said. Jesus said to her, you are right when you say that you have no husband. The fact is, you've had 5 husbands, and the man you now have is not your husband. So what you just said is quite true. Sir, the woman said, I can see that you're a prophet. Our ancestors worshipped on this mountain, but you Jews claim that the place where we must worship is in Jerusalem. Woman, Jesus replied, believe me, a time is coming when you will worship the Father neither on this mountain nor in Jerusalem. You Samaritans worship what you do not know, but we worship what we know, for salvation is from the Jews. Verse 25, the woman said, I know that the Messiah, called the Christ, is coming. And when he comes, he will explain everything to us. And then Jesus declared, I, the one speaking to you, I am him. I'm he. I am him. Just then the disciples returned. They were surprised to find him talking with a woman, but nobody asked, what do you want, or why are you talking with her? I like that. It was just awkward silence. Then leaving her water jar, the woman went back to the town and said to the people, come see a man who told me everything I ever did. Could this be the Messiah? So this is a profound story. Jesus leaves Jerusalem to head back to Galilee, and John tells us that he has to go through Samaria. What John doesn't tell us is that there were 2 different routes that Jews could travel from Jerusalem to Galilee that went through Samaria. One was the direct route, and it went right through this town, this city called Sychar, which is where this story takes place. But there was another route. There was a long way around, and that, even though it was a long way around, it avoided all the towns and villages in Samaria. And Jews so despised Samaritans that they always took the long way around, so that they didn't have any association. They didn't have any time where they would interact with any Samaritans. And in fact, John tells us Jews had no dealings with the Samaritans. I mean, just step back and think about that for a second. Like in today's language, and think about the bigotry of that statement, the hatred. Think about the evil in that. That there would be people that you just go, I don't associate with those people simply because of the color of their skin. I have no dealings with them. I will not talk to them. I will not do business with them. I will not live by them. I will not have my kids by them. Like, just think of that. That this is not something new. This is an issue that goes back thousands of years, right? The craziness that humans will engage in. Jews did not associate in any way. They had no dealings with the Samaritans, but not Jesus. Jesus, when he goes through Samaria, he goes straight north. He goes to Sychar, and he takes his disciples, ready or not, no explanation, no preparation. He takes them right into the middle of all that cultural awkwardness, all that racial tension, and he just moves right into it. Why? Why would he do that? Well, because he had an appointment. With who? With this woman in this story. And see, maybe the most unexpected part of God's plan to save the world is that it unfolds one life at a time. It's literally like if you were trying to design and advise Jesus or advise God on how he should save the world, you would never design a scenario where God in human form would go into a town to have a conversation with one woman. You would never design it that way. You would push him to Rome. You would amplify his voice. You would have all of the rulers and people of power and influence come. You would win those people over. That's how you would do it. But Jesus has an appointment with a woman at a well in a town nobody wanted to go to. And then there's the woman in the story. She's at the well at the wrong time of the day. The women in this culture, and still to this day in this part of the world, the women get up early in the morning, they grab their buckets, anything they can put water in, and they get together as a group, and they head to the well together as a group. And they do what women do today. They talk about their lives and their husbands and kids and catch up on life. They're just not wearing yoga pants in this story. It's the only difference. And it's okay if you don't work out. At least you look like you work out if you wear yoga pants. But they would do it all before the heat of the day because it was just so much harder when it was hot. But this woman, she lives in the village, but she doesn't go with the other women. In fact, she intentionally avoids them. And it tells us why. She's had 5 husbands, and the man she's with isn't her husband. See, in our day, that just kind of sounds like you were wilding out in your 20s, right? But in her day, that could actually get her killed. And so what happened? How did she end up in this situation? What's the story? What's the story of the 5 husbands? How did she go through 5 different men? Like, what happened? We don't know. I mean, maybe all those 5 guys, maybe they all died. See, in this culture, it was customary if a man died for his brother to marry his wife. Maybe they were all brothers, and something happened, and they all just sort of kicked it. And maybe that's why the guy she's with won't marry her. He's like, nah, Black Widow, I ain't going out like that. There's already 5 dudes in front of me that died. I am not about to be number 6, right? Or maybe she's just sort of wildly sexual and promiscuous and unfaithful. Maybe she's terrified of being alone, and so she's desperate for love, and she'll give herself to any old guy that comes along because she just wants to be loved. We don't know. What we do know is that whatever the story is with all of that, we know that she's ashamed. We know that she's isolating herself because she's here at this place at this time, not because she really wants to be, but because it's just easier. And so she's hiding from all of that. She spends her energy avoiding everyone and everything. Her life hadn't gone according to plan, and this was her workaround. This was how she was just managing it. And when I read that and I started thinking about it, I thought, like, man, I don't know if you've ever been there. I've been there. I think this is one of the things that makes Scripture so powerful. It's not just that these stories happened, although they did. It's that they keep happening. It's that these kinds of stories, they point to these universal patterns in the human experience. Because we do this too, right? Like we make decisions and we make mistakes and we make choices, and then we take into our own hands our own story, and then when it gets messed up and we don't know how to fix it, and we don't know how to go back, and we don't know what to do with all of that pain and past and baggage and all this trail of stuff that's behind us. And so it's just easier sometimes for us to just hide from it, to push it away, to work around it, to figure out how we can not have to face dealing with all that shame. And so we isolate and we move around. See, this is a story about an ancient unnamed woman in an obscure part of the Middle East whose life has been full of pain and disappointment. But it's also a story about you and me because we've been there. We've done that. I have. I've avoided certain people and places in my life because I just didn't want to have the conversation or have to relive those moments or deal with the mess again or face up to the thing that I said or did the last time I saw them. And so she heads to the well in the middle of the day when nobody else would be there, only, oops, God is there. The Savior of the world is there. And Jesus starts to masterfully draw her out in this conversation and lead her to himself. And so they go back and forth about water and buckets and thirst and mountains. And she thinks that they're talking about water and buckets and thirst and mountains. But Jesus is actually talking about something completely different. And finally, when it starts to dawn on her in desperation, she almost is like, I'm weary of life, I'm weary of hiding, I'm tired. Whatever it is you're selling, I'm buying. Please, just give me this water. And what I want you to notice is that when she reaches that point, that Jesus doesn't tiptoe around the mess or the pain or the sin or the brokenness in her life. See, you would think if we were in charge and somebody was like, just please give me this water, give me this thing that you have, God, that we would just go, just give it to her, God. She wants it, just give her the water. But Jesus is like, actually, there's some business we got to deal with first. Not for my sake, for yours. And so he says, go call your husband. She says, I don't have a husband. He's like, you're right. You've had 5, and the man you're with isn't your husband. And I think when we read this, it's easy to sort of read it as almost a little bit cruel, like Jesus is toying with her a little bit, or like Jesus is calling her out, or he's kind of just putting her on blast, but he's not. And so what is it that's happening here? See, Jesus is about to reveal to her who he is, that he is him, that I'm God, that I am him. But before he does that, he goes after this space in her heart, in her soul, in her story, that only he can heal. She's got all these patterns and all these coping mechanisms, all these workarounds for not having to face and deal with the judgment and the shame from other people because of the fallout of the story that she's lived. And she's good at it. But you know what she's not been able to pull off? Healing. She's not been able to pull off being forgiven or being freed or being made new. And so Jesus, being who he is, he goes directly for that most tender, protected, vulnerable spot inside her life so that he can bring it to the surface, so that he can begin to heal her and set her free. See, the places that you and I run to and hide, those are the biggest barriers to us actually knowing Jesus. Because we have these places and these issues and these experiences that we hide from other people, that we sort of push off into the back corner of our life as if Jesus doesn't know that they're there, as if he wasn't present when we lived them and when we did them. And so Jesus goes after that spot that's so tender that she doesn't want anybody else to know, anybody else to speak to, anybody else to touch. And why does he do that? Because it's in his touch, in his ability, his love, that place can finally be healed. See, I want you to know this morning that the darkest and dirtiest and scariest and messiest and most painful places in your soul, the places that feel the farthest away from God, the places where you're embarrassed, the places where you're angry at God, why did this happen? The places where all of your doubts and questions and fears and mess and darkness and sin, all of those places that are in your soul, they aren't too dark, they're not too dirty or scary or messy or sinful for Jesus. That's what's happening here. In fact, those are the very places that he leans in, because he's going, I want you to know me. And the only way you're going to know me is if you let me inside, that you don't just know information about me, that you just don't know that I'm the Messiah and put your faith in me, but you actually let me inside your soul to the unseen parts of you. It's the very places that God puts his finger on. And notice that she does what we do. She starts to feel very vulnerable and exposed, and so she immediately shifts the conversation from her heart to her head. She goes back to this sort of philosophical, religious discussion. He's like, "You're right. The man you've had 5 husbands, and the man you're with is not your husband." And she's like, "I can see that you are a prophet of some sort. Our people worship on this mountain. You guys worship on that mountain. Who knows?" Right? And that's what we do. Oh, God, feelings, fears, vulnerability, pain. No, God. Let's argue about Bible translations instead. But Jesus doesn't take the bait in this conversation. And he doesn't take the bait in our conversations. See, God is not this like philosophy or this set of principles for us to follow. He's actually a person to get to know and have a relationship with. And that you allow him to get to know you. And so she says to Jesus, the Messiah is coming, and when he gets here, he'll clear all this up. All this confusion about, did we worship there, here, who knows? And that is when Jesus drops the bomb on her. He says, "I'm him. I am he." To us, this just sounds like an ordinary response. But to first century Jewish ears, Jesus is echoing the very way that God revealed himself to Moses all the way back in Exodus. He's going, "I am him." The I am is here. God is here, the creator, the king, the Messiah, the Christ, the Savior is here. The one who was never made, the one who never changes, and the one who's always enough is here, speaking to you. Now, here's the problem most of us have, even as Christians, when we read stories like this. We read them impersonally, right? We read them and we highlight a couple of verses and we jot down a note. We have a quiet time, that's what we call it. Doesn't that sound like a punishment? Go have a quiet time with Jesus. Okay. Right? And so we sit with our coffee and we have our Bible open, we have our journal, and we take a little picture, hashtag, whatever. We jot down the note, we read this story and we go, Jesus meets people in their messes. Ooh, that's good. We write that down. That's what we take. And then we post it and we go, amen. And then we stop there and we close our Bibles and we put away our journals and we go, that was so powerful. And we keep it all at this emotionally and spiritually safe distance. It's this general truth that sort of applies to everybody. But here's the problem. See, the thing is, we're all the woman at the well. And so when Jesus tells her to go get her husband, the most intimate, deep, dark, tender, vulnerable place in her soul and story, that's what he wants to do with us. To reach inside of us and to begin to speak to that place that nobody knows, or maybe only just a few people know the truth about. The place that only he can reach, the place that only he can bring freedom, the place that only he can heal. To step inside your biggest fears and your biggest doubts, to step inside your deepest disappointments and your darkest sins, and for you to let him in. That's why he came. See, that's the difference between knowing about Jesus and starting to know him. Is that you don't just write down the thing and be, that's really good. I'm going to share that with somebody that needs to hear it. And meanwhile, God's going, hey, I think you need to hear that. I think you need to let me inside. Let me get personal. Let me get to the unseen. Yeah, it's great that you post that picture. It's great that you shared that truth. But what's going on in your soul? So at the beginning of the book of John, in the very first chapter, in verse 4, John describes the impact of Jesus coming into the world. And he says this. He says, in him was life, and that life was the light of all humanity. I know that there's a lot of people that speak on behalf of Jesus these days. But I want you to know, if you've had any experiences where Jesus was presented as anything less than life and light, he's been misrepresented to you. And then in verse 5, John tells us this incredible truth. He says that the light shines in the darkness, but the darkness has not and cannot and will not overcome it. Now, depending on where you are in your spiritual journey, Jesus might represent different things to you. But I want you to know that the impact, the interaction, the description of what happens when we encounter him for who he truly is, not just information about him, the impact when we get to know him is life and light. See, when Jesus enters our world, he resurrects dead places and he illuminates dark spaces and he begins to heal things that are long since we gave up on ever overcoming, and bring freedom where we've been locked up. And if any of that's ever been misrepresented to you, I'd like to say that we want the opportunity the next couple of months to try to change that. I want to invite you in June and July to be here so that you can actually begin to wrestle with who Jesus is in a personal way, not just the information about him. And so I always give you a little bit of a challenge or homework at the end, but this is what I want to invite you into. Whether you're sort of new to this faith stuff and wrestling with, like doubts and whether or not it's real and who's Jesus and I don't know, or you've been a longtime believer, this is the same, in my opinion. I'm going to give you the same challenge, that you would pursue a personal, not an impersonal, relationship with Jesus, that would be your goal, that it's going to be uncomfortable, that God's going to speak to you about mess and stuff that's just you've been locked away and buried away for a long time, that God's trying to work with you and invite you into his heart for you and get you to open up and let him into the deep places in your soul. That you would not just settle for knowing about him, but that you would determine in this next couple of months to actually know him. Because the truth is that God relates to us in Jesus, in the person of Jesus, in very specific ways, and that is why Jesus has these 8 statements through the book of John, because John wanted us to sort of wrap our heads around who Jesus was and what does it mean for us. But I just want to challenge you to let him get into that private, personal and vulnerable space in your life. And the best part is, if you need life, if you need light, he's here. That's who he is. That's what he does. He stepped out of heaven and he came to earth. He will absolutely come to where you are. You don't have to clean it up to find him. You don't have to search for him to find him. That he's been waiting for you. He's been pursuing you with his love. He's right here if you would just let him into your story. See, you can be a person of faith and not really actually know Jesus. My challenge for you is that you would change that. Let's pray together.